Jungkook left without saying goodbye, but left a last letter for Jimin. Jungkook vanished without saying goodbye, leaving Jimin only one heartbreaking letter, and a secret that could change everything they thought they knew. Jimin, if you are reading this, I have already left, and please, for once in your life, do not come looking for me. The paper trembled between Jimin's fingers as rain hammered against the apartment windows, each drop striking the glass like a desperate knock from someone who had arrived too late. Jimin stood completely still beside the kitchen table, staring at the handwriting he knew better than his own. Jungkook's handwriting. The letters leaned slightly to the right whenever Jungkook was nervous, and every lowercase g carried the same tiny loop Jimin had teased him about for years. But this time there was something different about it. The ink looked darker, heavier, as though every word had been pressed into the paper with a hand that refused to stop shaking. Jimin swallowed hard. "No," he whispered. "No, Jungkook." The apartment was silent except for the rain, the refrigerator humming in the corner, and the faint ticking of the old wooden clock Jungkook had repaired 3 winters ago because Jimin had once complained that the sound helped him sleep. The clock read 2:17. Jimin looked toward the front door. It was locked. Jungkook's shoes were gone. His black coat was gone. The small leather backpack he carried whenever he traveled was gone. But everything else remained. Jungkook's favorite mug sat beside the sink. His headphones were still tangled around the arm of the sofa. A half-finished book rested face down on the coffee table, the corner of one page folded exactly the way Jimin always told him not to fold it. Even the little plant Jungkook had named Momo was sitting beneath the window, its leaves trembling whenever the wind pushed against the glass. Jimin's breathing became uneven. Jungkook had not simply gone out. Jungkook had planned to leave. Jimin lowered his eyes to the letter again. "Why?" he whispered. The first page contained only a few sentences, but each one seemed capable of cutting deeper than a blade. "Jimin, I know you will be angry. I know you will think I betrayed you. Maybe I did. Maybe leaving without looking into your eyes was the cruelest thing I have ever done. But if I had stayed long enough to see you, I would not have been able to leave. And if I could not leave, something terrible would happen to you." Jimin's fingers tightened around the paper. "Something terrible." He read the sentence again. Then again, his mind raced through every possibility. Had Jungkook been threatened? Had someone followed him? Had something happened that Jungkook had hidden? Jimin remembered the last week. Jungkook had been different. Not distant exactly, but distracted. He had started checking the hallway before opening the door. He had stopped leaving his phone unattended. He had begun waking in the middle of the night and standing by the window without saying a word. Whenever Jimin asked what was wrong, Jungkook smiled and said, "Nothing." But Jimin knew Jungkook. Nothing. It was the smile he used when he was frightened. It was the smile that made one corner of his mouth rise while his eyes remained completely serious. Jimin had seen it before. He had seen it the first time Jungkook had lied about being hurt. He had seen it the night Jungkook received a phone call and walked outside for 20 minutes. He had seen it yesterday morning when Jimin asked, "Are you sure you're okay?" And Jungkook answered, "I'm better when you're here." Jimin closed his eyes. That sentence suddenly sounded like a goodbye. He opened the letter again. "Do not trust the blue envelope." Jimin frowned. "What blue envelope?" His eyes moved down the page. "If someone gives you one, burn it without opening it. If someone tells you that I left because I wanted to disappear, do not believe them. And if you find the photograph behind the clock, you will finally understand why I had to go." Jimin stopped breathing. His gaze slowly shifted toward the wooden clock. The clock Jungkook had repaired. The clock Jungkook never allowed anyone else to touch. "What did you do?" Jimin whispered. He crossed the room. His bare feet touched the cold floor as he approached the clock. The rain became louder. The apartment seemed suddenly smaller, as if the walls had moved closer around him. He reached for the clock and pulled it away from the wall. Nothing. His heart hammered. He turned it around. The wooden back looked ordinary. There was a small screw beneath the frame. Jimin stared at it. Jungkook had once told him that the clock was old and difficult to repair. Jimin had believed him. He searched the kitchen drawer for a screwdriver, knocking over a spoon and nearly dropping the entire drawer in his hurry. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on, Jungkook." His hands were shaking so badly that he struggled to turn the screw. When it finally came loose, the wooden panel shifted. Something white slid from inside and fell onto the floor. Jimin froze. It was a photograph. He crouched slowly and picked it up. The photograph was old. The edges were burned. In the center stood a younger Jungkook, perhaps 3 or 4 years younger, wearing a dark jacket and staring at the camera with an expression Jimin had never seen before. Fear. Beside Jungkook stood another man. His face had been scratched out with something sharp. On the back of the photograph, someone had written 4 words. "He knows about Jimin." Jimin's blood turned cold. He flipped the photograph over again. His eyes searched Jungkook's face. "Who is he?" The question came out as barely more than air. Then his phone rang. Jimin nearly dropped the photograph. The screen showed an unknown number. He stared at it. The ringing stopped. A message appeared. "Do not open the blue envelope." Jimin's stomach twisted. Another message arrived. "Jungkook did not leave you. He was taken." Jimin stepped backward. His shoulder struck the wall. "No." Another message appeared. "If you want Him alive, do not call the police." Jimin stared at the screen until the words blurred. Somewhere outside, a car engine started. Jimin turned toward the window. A black vehicle was parked across the street, its headlights off, its windshield dark beneath the rain. He could not see the driver. The vehicle had been there before. He remembered noticing it 3 nights ago. He had assumed it belonged to a neighbor. Now he knew better. Jimin's heart began pounding violently. He turned off the apartment lights. The room fell into darkness. He moved toward the window and lowered himself beneath the frame. The black vehicle remained motionless. His phone vibrated again. "This is your only warning, Jimin. Forget Jungkook." Jimin looked at the photograph in his hand. His fear slowly transformed into something harder. Anger. "You don't get to tell me that," he whispered. He picked up Jungkook's letter and pressed it against his chest. Jungkook had always been the one who protected him, the one who stepped between him and danger, the one who quietly carried burdens without asking anyone to notice. But Jungkook had made one mistake. He had underestimated how stubborn Jimin could become when someone he loved was in danger. Jimin walked into the bedroom and opened the wardrobe. Beneath a pile of clothes was a small black suitcase. He pulled it out and placed it on the bed. He packed a jacket, a flashlight, a charger, some cash, and the photograph. Then he stopped. His eyes fell on the empty side of the bed. Jungkook's pillow was still there. Jimin touched it. It still smelled faintly like Jungkook's shampoo and the cedarwood soap he always used. For one painful second, Jimin imagined Jungkook lying there, turning toward him and mumbling, "You're awake again." Jimin almost smiled. Then the memory shattered. He opened the letter one more time. There was another sentence beneath the signature that he had not noticed before. "Jimin, there is one thing I never told you. The night you thought I was asleep, I heard you say my name." Jimin stared at the words. His eyes filled with tears. "Of course I said your name." His voice broke. "I say it every day." He continued reading. "You said, 'Please don't leave me.' I wanted to tell you that I never would, but I knew even then that someday I might have to break that promise." Jimin covered his mouth. A tear rolled down his cheek. He remembered that night. He had thought Jungkook was asleep. Jimin had been sitting beside him in the darkness, terrified by a dream he could not remember. He had whispered Jungkook's name because saying it made the darkness feel less threatening. Jungkook had apparently heard him. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jimin asked the empty room. No answer came. Only rain, only silence, only the cruel ticking of the clock. Jimin wiped his face and closed the suitcase. Then something struck the window. He flinched. Once, twice. A small object rolled down the glass and landed on the balcony. Jimin stared. He opened the balcony door just enough to reach outside. Cold rain splashed against his hand. On the floor lay a blue envelope. Jimin froze. Every instinct told him to step away. Jungkook had warned him. Do not trust the blue envelope. Burn it without opening it. But why had someone thrown it onto his balcony? And how had they known where he lived? Jimin stared at the envelope. His name was written across the front. Jimin, nothing else. He stepped back. The blue envelope looked almost innocent under the pale streetlight. That was what frightened him most. Jimin remembered Jungkook's warning. He remembered the photograph. He remembered the message saying Jungkook had been taken. Then he remembered something else. 3 weeks ago, Jungkook had asked him a strange question. "If I ever tell you to forget me, would you?" Jimin had laughed at the time. "Never." Jungkook had looked at him for several seconds before smiling. "Good." Jimin had thought it was romantic. Now he understood it had been preparation. He walked back inside and grabbed a pair of gloves. He put them on before approaching the envelope. Carefully, he picked it up. It was heavier than it should have been. Something hard was inside. Jimin carried it to the kitchen and placed it on the table. He stared at it for a long time. Then he took a pair of scissors and cut the edge. A small metal key fell onto the table. Jimin stared at it. The key was old and silver with a tiny number engraved into its surface. 17. Beneath it was a second photograph. This one showed Jimin. Jimin's blood ran cold. It had been taken from outside the apartment. Jimin was standing by the window. Behind him, reflected faintly in the glass, was Jungkook. The photograph had been taken months ago. On the back, someone had written, "He was watching you before you knew him." Jimin dropped it. His chair scraped violently against the floor as he stood. "Who are you?" he shouted toward the dark window. "What do you want?" The black vehicle across the street suddenly turned on its headlights. Jimin stepped backward. The engine roared. The vehicle moved, not away, toward the building. Jimin grabbed the key and photograph and ran. He switched off the kitchen light, grabbed his suitcase, and rushed toward the back door. His hand was on the handle when he heard footsteps in the hallway outside his apartment. Slow footsteps, deliberate footsteps. Someone stopped directly outside the door. Jimin held his breath. 3 knocks sounded. Knock, 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 then silence. Jimin looked at the letter. One sentence seemed to burn into his memory. "If someone tells you that I left because I wanted to disappear, do not believe them." The door handle moved. Jimin stepped backward. The handle turned again. Then a voice came through the door. "Jimin." Jimin froze. He knew that voice. His heart shattered before his mind could accept it. "Jungkook." The voice came again, softer this time. "Jimin, don't open the door." Jimin's eyes filled with tears. "Jungkook." He moved closer despite himself. "Is that you?" Silence. Then Jungkook whispered, "I'm sorry." Jimin pressed his palm against the door. "Where are you?" "Don't open it." "Jungkook, where are you?" "Please." The voice sounded strained, almost breathless. "Listen to me. Whatever happens, don't open the door." Jimin began crying. "I thought you left. I wanted you to think that." "Why?" Jungkook did not answer. Jimin heard something in the hallway, a second voice, a man whispering. Jungkook suddenly said, "Run." The lights in the apartment went out. Jimin heard the door slam inward. He turned and ran through the darkness. Something crashed behind him. Glass shattered. A shadow entered the apartment. Jimin grabbed the suitcase and rushed toward the emergency stairwell. Behind him, someone shouted his name. He ran down the stairs, his heartbeat pounding against his ribs. He did not look back. He could not. The rain outside had become a storm. Jimin burst through the back entrance and disappeared into the darkness, clutching Jungkook's letter against his chest. He had no idea where Jungkook was. He did not know who the man was. He did not know why his own photograph had been taken months before. But as Jimin ran through the rain, one truth settled inside him with terrifying clarity. Jungkook had not abandoned him. Jungkook had been trying to protect him. And somewhere in the darkness, Jungkook was waiting for him to uncover the truth. Jimin did not stop running until the city disappeared behind him in a blur of rain, headlights, and trembling shadows. His lungs burned, his shoes were soaked through, and Jungkook's letter had become soft at the edges where Jimin's wet fingers had gripped it too tightly, but he refused to slow down. Every few seconds, Jimin looked over his shoulder. No one was following him. At least, no one he could see. The streets were nearly empty at that hour, washed silver beneath the streetlights with rainwater flowing along the gutters like thin streams of glass. Jimin finally ducked beneath the awning of a closed cafe and pressed his back against the brick wall. He bent forward, trying to catch his breath. "Jungkook," he whispered. The name escaped him like a prayer. He closed his eyes. He could still hear Jungkook's voice from behind the apartment door. "Don't open it. Run." Jimin had obeyed, but every part of him hated himself for leaving. What if Jungkook had been inside? What if Jungkook had been hurt? What if that voice had really been Jungkook's final attempt to save him? Jimin pulled the letter from his jacket and carefully unfolded it. The paper was damp, but most of the writing remained readable. He read the first paragraph again. Jungkook had said he had left to protect him. He had said he could not explain everything because explanations would put Jimin in greater danger. Yet Jungkook had also left clues. The photograph, the key, the clock, the blue envelope. None of those things felt accidental. Jungkook had planned for Jimin to discover them. Jimin slowly slid down the wall until he was sitting on the wet pavement beneath the awning. "You wanted me to find you," he murmured. "Didn't you, Jungkook?" He looked at the silver key in his palm. Number 17. The key was cold against his skin. He remembered Jungkook's habits. Jungkook always counted doors when they entered unfamiliar buildings. He always checked exits in restaurants. He always sat facing the entrance. Jimin had once teased him about it. "Are you secretly a spy?" Jimin had joked. Jungkook had laughed. "Maybe." Jimin had laughed too. Now the memory felt different. Perhaps Jungkook had never been joking. Jimin stood and walked toward the nearest street corner. He needed somewhere safe. Somewhere Jungkook would have chosen. His mind moved through the places they had shared over the years. The old bookstore, the rooftop garden, the riverside bench, the abandoned train station where they had once hidden during a storm. Then Jimin remembered the number, 17. Room 17, he whispered. There was only one place he could think of, the old Riverside Hotel. Jungkook had stayed there once when he was younger. He had told Jimin almost nothing about the trip. Jimin remembered only one strange detail. Jungkook had kept the room key long after checking out. "Why do you still have it?" Jimin had asked. Jungkook had smiled and placed the key inside his wallet. "Some doors are worth remembering." Jimin had thought it was another one of Jungkook's strange answers. Now he wondered if Jungkook had been waiting for this exact night. Jimin took a taxi to the hotel. The journey felt endless. Every red light seemed too long. Every passing car made him turn his head. The driver glanced at him through the mirror. "Are you okay?" Jimin wiped rain from his face. "I'm fine." The driver hesitated. "You don't look fine." Jimin looked out the window. "Someone I love disappeared." The driver said nothing after that. When they reached the hotel, Jimin paid quickly and entered through the side entrance. The Riverside Hotel looked almost abandoned. Only a single lamp illuminated the reception desk. The smell of old wood, dust, and rain filled the lobby. An elderly receptionist looked up. "Can I help you?" Jimin approached the desk. "Room 17. The receptionist's expression changed. It was subtle, but Jimin noticed. Her fingers stopped moving. "There hasn't been a guest in room 17 for years." Jimin placed the silver key on the counter. "This belongs there." The woman stared at the key, then she looked at Jimin. "Who gave you that?" Jimin swallowed. "Jungkook." The woman became pale. "You know Jungkook?" "Yes." "Then you should leave." Jimin frowned. "Why?" The woman leaned closer. "Because the last person who used that key never came back." Jimin's heart began pounding. "Who?" The woman shook her head. "I don't know. You're lying. I'm trying to keep you alive." Jimin stared at her. There was fear in her eyes, not confusion, not surprise, fear. "You knew him," Jimin said quietly. The woman looked toward the dark hallway. "I knew a boy who came here years ago. He was frightened. He kept asking me whether someone had followed him." "What did he look like?" "Tall, dark hair, quiet." Jimin's throat tightened. "Jungkook." The woman nodded slowly. "He said his name was Jungkook." Jimin gripped the counter. "What happened?" "He rented room 17 for 3 nights. On the 3rd night, a man came looking for him." "Who?" "I never saw his face clearly." The receptionist lowered her voice. "But Jungkook left something behind." Jimin stared at her. "What?" She pointed toward the staircase. "Go upstairs, room 17. You said no one has used it for years. That doesn't mean the room is empty." Jimin took the key. He walked toward the staircase. Every step creaked beneath his weight. The hallway upstairs smelled of dust and damp wallpaper. A single bulb flickered above him. Room 17 was at the very end. Jimin stood before the door. His hand trembled as he inserted the key. The lock turned with a soft click. He pushed the door open. The room was dark. Jimin switched on the lamp. Dust floated through the yellow light. There was a narrow bed, an old desk, a wooden chair, and a window overlooking the river. Everything looked untouched, except for one thing. A black notebook sat on the desk. Jimin approached slowly. He recognized it immediately. Jungkook always carried notebooks like this. Black cover, no title, no decoration. Jimin had never been allowed to read them. "You kept secrets from me," Jimin whispered. He opened the notebook. The first page contained only one sentence. "If Jimin finds this, I have failed to keep him away." Jimin's eyes burned. He turned the page. The next pages were filled with dates. Names, locations, short notes, most of them meant nothing to him. Then he saw his own name, Jimin. Beneath it was a date from 5 years ago. Jimin sat down heavily. 5 years. Jungkook had been watching over him for 5 years. He kept reading. Jimin was not the target. Jimin was the reason. The sentence made no sense. Jimin turned the page. There was a photograph attached. It showed Jimin standing outside a building he had worked at years earlier. Someone had circled him in red ink. Beside the photograph was another name, Han Seojin. Jimin frowned. He knew that name, not personally, but from an old news story. Han Seojin had disappeared after being accused of financial crimes and organized intimidation. The case had never been solved. Jimin looked at the notebook again. Several pages later, Jungkook had written another note. "Seojin knows Jimin. Seojin knows what Jimin saw." Jimin stopped. "What did I see?" he whispered. His memory searched itself. 5 years ago, the night everything changed. He had been walking home after work when he witnessed an argument near an underground parking lot. He remembered two men shouting. One had been wearing a gray coat, the other had been carrying a metal case. Jimin had called the police afterward, but when officers arrived, the men were gone. Jimin had assumed it was nothing. A week later, Jungkook appeared in his life. They had met by accident. At least Jimin had always believed it was an accident. He slowly closed the notebook. "You knew," he whispered. "Jungkook, you knew all along." A soft sound came from the hallway. Jimin looked up, footsteps. Someone was walking past the door. He stood quickly. The footsteps stopped. Jimin held his breath. A shadow passed beneath the door, then continued down the hall. He waited. Nothing happened. He looked back at the notebook. A folded sheet of paper had fallen from between the pages. Jimin picked it up. Jungkook's handwriting covered the front. "Jimin, if you have reached this room, then you already know that our meeting was not an accident." Jimin's eyes filled with tears. He continued reading. "I was sent to watch you. At first, I was told you were only a witness. I was supposed to make sure you stayed alive until the case was closed. But I broke the rules. I became your friend, then your closest friend, then the person who could no longer imagine a life without you." Jimin pressed the letter against his chest. "Jungkook." The next sentence was almost unbearable. "I was afraid to tell you because I knew the truth would make you look at every memory differently. You would wonder whether my kindness was real. You would question every moment, every laugh. Every night I stayed awake beside you. Please believe me when I say this. Whatever brought me to you, what I felt for you was never part of anyone's plan." Jimin sat on the bed. Tears slipped down his face. He remembered everything. The first time Jungkook had brought him coffee because he had forgotten breakfast. The first winter they had walked for hours because Jimin said he hated going home early. The night Jimin had fallen asleep on Jungkook's shoulder. The countless times Jungkook had silently moved closer whenever Jimin looked afraid. None of those moments had felt fake. Jimin whispered, "I believe you." He turned the page. The final section contained a series of instructions. Find the truth beneath the old station. Do not trust anyone who says they know where I am. Do not come alone. Jimin stared at the words, then he noticed something beneath them. A small drawing, a circle around the number 17, and beneath the circle was a sentence written in smaller letters. "There is another room." Jimin looked around. Another room. He searched the walls, nothing. He checked the desk, nothing. He examined the floorboards. One of them looked slightly different. Jimin knelt and touched it. The wood was loose. He pulled it upward. Beneath the floor was a narrow metal box. His pulse quickened. He opened it. Inside were three things: a small recorder, a photograph of Jungkook, and a folded piece of fabric that Jimin recognized instantly. It was Jungkook's black scarf. Jimin touched it to his face. The familiar scent of cedarwood and soap remained faintly in the fabric. He closed his eyes. "You were here," he whispered. The recorder had one button. Jimin pressed it. Static filled the room, then Jungkook's voice emerged. "Jimin." Jimin stopped breathing. Hearing Jungkook's voice again nearly broke him. "If you're listening to this, I'm sorry." The recording crackled. Jungkook sounded exhausted. "I know you want answers. I know you are angry. You have every right to be." A pause. "But I need you to understand something. I did not disappear because I stopped caring about you. I disappeared because I cared too much." Jimin covered his mouth. Jungkook continued. "There are people who believe you still have evidence from that night 5 years ago. You don't remember taking it. That's why they haven't found it." Jimin frowned. "Evidence? The photograph you saw was not the important thing. You were standing beside the evidence without knowing it." Jimin's mind raced. "What evidence?" Jungkook's voice became quieter. "The old station." The recording stopped for several seconds. Then Jungkook spoke again. "I have one last request. Don't trust my brother." Jimin froze. Jungkook had never mentioned having a brother, not once. "Jungkook." Jimin whispered to the empty room. The recording continued. "If he finds you, he will tell you that I left willingly. He will tell you I betrayed you. He will tell you everything was my choice. Don't believe him." A loud noise sounded in the background of the recording. Jungkook's breathing changed. "They're here." The recording crackled. "Jimin, I love you." The words were barely audible. Then the recording ended. Jimin remained frozen. He replayed the final seconds again and again. Jungkook's voice, "I love you." Words echoed inside the room. Jimin lowered his head and cried silently. He had spent years wondering whether Jungkook ever understood how deeply he mattered to him. Now Jungkook had finally said the words, but only after disappearing. Jimin wiped his tears and stood. He took the notebook, the photograph, the key, and the recorder. He put Jungkook's scarf around his neck. It was too large, but he did not care. As he stepped toward the door, the receptionist appeared in the hallway. She looked frightened. "You heard the recording." Jimin nodded. "You knew. Not everything. Tell me about Jungkook." The woman looked down. He came here alone, he was injured. Jimin's expression changed. Injured? He had blood on his shirt. How long ago? 2 nights ago. Jimin's heart stopped. 2 nights. Jungkook had been here 2 nights ago. He had not been gone for weeks. He had been close. Where did he go? The receptionist shook her head. A man came for him. His brother. The woman looked startled. How do you know? Jimin stepped closer. Jungkook told me not to trust him. The receptionist hesitated. Then Jungkook was right. Jimin's stomach tightened. What is his brother's name? The woman looked toward the window. Kang Minyu. Jimin repeated the name silently. Minyu. Jungkook had never mentioned him. The receptionist continued. But there is something you should know. What? Jungkook wasn't alone when he left. Jimin waited. There was another person with him. Who? A woman. Jimin frowned. What woman? The receptionist shook her head. I don't know, but Jungkook called her by one name. What name? The woman looked directly at Jimin. Mina. Jimin felt a strange chill. He had heard that name before, not from Jungkook, from his own past. 5 years ago, on the night of the parking garage incident, one of the men had shouted that name. Jimin remembered it now, Mina. He had forgotten it for years. Jimin slowly stepped backward. The pieces were beginning to connect. Jungkook had not entered his life by accident. The mysterious photograph, the old station, Han Seojin, Jungkook's unknown brother, Mina, and the evidence Jimin apparently carried without knowing it. But beneath all of that, there was something more painful. Jungkook had spent years protecting him while secretly believing that one day he might have to disappear. Jimin looked down at Jungkook's scarf. You should have trusted me, he whispered. You should have let me choose whether I was afraid. He walked toward the staircase. The receptionist called after him. Where are you going? Jimin stopped. To the old station. You cannot go alone. Jimin turned. I'm not going alone. He held up Jungkook's notebook. I'm taking everything Jungkook left behind. Outside, the rain had finally begun to weaken. The city smelled of wet pavement and cold air. Jimin stepped into the street and looked toward the distant railway lines. Somewhere beyond them was the old station. Somewhere beyond that was the truth. And somewhere, perhaps only a few miles away, Jungkook was still fighting to return. Jimin tightened Jungkook's scarf around his neck and began walking. For the first time since Jungkook disappeared, Jimin no longer felt like someone waiting to be rescued. He felt like someone searching, and every step carried him closer to the life Jungkook had tried so desperately to hide from him. The old railway station appeared through the morning fog like a memory that had refused to die. Jimin stood beneath the rusted sign, his fingers wrapped tightly around Jungkook's black scarf, while the cold wind carried the smell of wet iron, moss, and distant smoke through the abandoned platform. The station had been closed for more than a decade, yet Jimin could still hear the faint echo of trains that no longer passed there, as though the tracks themselves remembered every departure. Jimin checked Jungkook's notebook again. The final instruction was still there, find the truth beneath the old station. Jimin stared at the words. I'm here, Jungkook. His voice disappeared into the fog. Now tell me where you are. He stepped through the broken entrance. His shoes crunched over shattered glass. Old advertisements peeled from the walls. A clock above the ticket counter had stopped at 11:43. Jimin remembered the photograph from 5 years ago, the underground parking lot, the metal case. The shouting, Mina, he had spent years convincing himself that memory was incomplete because it had happened so quickly. But now pieces were returning, a silver ring, a gray coat, a man shouting, Mina, take the case. Then another voice, a younger Jungkook. Run! Jimin stopped walking. His heart began pounding. Jungkook had been there 5 years ago. He had been watching Jimin long before Jimin ever knew his name. Jimin touched the wall for balance. Why didn't you tell me? He whispered. Somewhere deeper inside the station, metal scraped against metal. Jimin froze. The sound came again. He slowly turned. A door at the end of the platform had moved slightly. Jimin approached it. The lock was broken. He pushed it open. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. His flashlight illuminated damp stone walls and old electrical wires. He began walking down. Every step echoed beneath him. At the bottom was a corridor. Jimin followed it until he reached a steel door marked with a faded number. 17. He pulled out the silver key. His hands trembled. The key slid into the lock perfectly. Click. The door opened. Inside was a small room filled with photographs, hundreds of them. Jimin stopped breathing. Every photograph showed him. Jimin leaving work. Jimin sitting at a cafe. Jimin walking beside Jungkook. Jimin sleeping on a train. Jimin laughing. Jimin crying. Jimin standing beside his apartment window. The walls were covered with years of his life. He stepped forward in disbelief. No. His fingers brushed one photograph. It showed Jimin and Jungkook sitting together beside the river. The date was 5 years ago. The photograph had been taken on the same day they first met. Jimin's knees weakened. You were there. A voice came from behind him. He was always there. Jimin spun around. A woman stood in the doorway. She wore a dark coat, her wet hair falling across one side of her face. Jimin recognized her instantly. Mina. The woman looked at him with tired eyes. So Jungkook finally told you. Jimin stepped backward. Where is Jungkook? Mina did not answer. Where is Jungkook? Jimin repeated. Alive. Relief hit Jimin so suddenly that he nearly collapsed. Where? Not somewhere you can reach yet. Jimin's expression hardened. You expect me to believe that? No, Mina entered the room. I expect you to believe what Jungkook left for you. She pointed toward the center of the room. A projector sat on an old table. Beside it was another black notebook. Jimin approached. What is this? The reason Jungkook disappeared. Mina turned on the projector. A video appeared on the wall. Jimin watched himself 5 years earlier. He was standing outside the underground parking garage. Behind him, 2 men were arguing. One carried a metal case. The other was wearing a gray coat. Jimin watched in silence. Then he saw himself turn toward the camera. Something had fallen beside his feet. A tiny silver device. Jimin frowned. What is that? Mina answered quietly. A recording device. The video continued. Younger Jimin picked it up without realizing what it was. He placed it in his pocket. Then Jungkook appeared in the frame. He was younger too, his face thinner, his eyes harder. He watched Jimin from a distance. Mina looked at Jimin. That device contained evidence against Han Seojin. Jimin's eyes remained fixed on the screen. Why didn't anyone take it from me? Because Seojin didn't know you had it. Then why did Jungkook stay with me? To find it. Jimin's jaw tightened. So everything began as a lie. Mina shook her head. At first. The video ended. Jimin turned toward her. And later, Mina looked down. Later, Jungkook stopped being your protector because he was assigned to you. He became your protector because he loved you. Jimin closed his eyes. The answer hurt more than he expected. When did he know? The first night you fell asleep on his shoulder. Jimin opened his eyes. How do you know that? Because Jungkook told me. Mina gave a faint, sad smile. He talked about you constantly. Jimin looked away. He remembered Jungkook's habit of pretending not to care whenever someone teased him about Jimin. He remembered Jungkook smiling whenever Jimin entered a room. He remembered how Jungkook always saved the last piece of dessert for him. Suddenly, those small things felt enormous. Why did he leave now? Jimin asked. Mina's expression became serious. Because Seojin found out the evidence still exists. Where is it? Mina looked directly at Jimin. Inside your memories. Jimin stared at her. What does that mean? The device contained a recording, but the recording was encrypted. Jungkook spent years trying to decode it. Eventually, he discovered that the password was not a word. It was a memory. Jimin's heartbeat quickened. Which memory? The one you lost. Silence filled the room. Jimin remembered waking several times during the past month with headaches. He remembered dreams of the parking garage. He remembered a woman shouting. He remembered Jungkook holding his shoulders and telling him to breathe. Jungkook knew, Jimin whispered. He knew I had forgotten. Mina nodded. He tried to protect you from remembering because the memory was dangerous. What happened that night? Mina hesitated. You saw something you were never supposed to see. What? Seojin ordered someone to kill a witness. Jimin's face went pale. I saw a murder. You saw the beginning of one. Jimin stepped backward. And Jungkook stopped it. The words struck him like thunder. Jimin remembered the sound of running footsteps. A hand grabbing his arm. A young Jungkook shouting his name, then darkness. He had always thought those memories belonged to a nightmare. They did not. They were real. Why didn't he tell me? Jimin asked. Mina looked at him with something close to pity. Because Jungkook believed you deserved one peaceful life. Jimin laughed bitterly. So he decided to destroy it himself. He thought disappearing would keep you safe. Jimin's eyes filled with tears. He was wrong. Mina did not argue. She walked to the far wall and removed a photograph. Behind it was a small compartment. She pulled out a phone. This belongs to Jungkook. Jimin grabbed it. The screen was locked. Mina said, he told me to give you this only if you found room 17. Can I unlock it? Try your birthday. Jimin entered the numbers. Nothing. His birthday. Nothing. He tried the date they first met. The screen remained locked. He closed his eyes. Then he remembered something Jungkook had once said. Some doors are worth remembering. Jimin entered 1711XX, the date Jungkook had repaired the old clock. The phone unlocked. Jimin stared at the screen. There was only one file, a video. He pressed play. Jungkook appeared. He was sitting in a dim room, his face bruised, his lips split, and a bandage wrapped around his wrist. Jimin's breath caught. Jungkook, the video began. Jimin, if you're watching this, Mina has already found you. Jungkook looked exhausted. I need you to listen carefully. Jimin moved closer. Jungkook continued. I didn't leave because I wanted freedom. I left because someone offered me a choice, your life or mine. Jimin's eyes widened. They told me that if I stayed beside you, they would hurt you. If I disappeared, they would leave you alone. Jungkook lowered his eyes. I believed them. Jimin whispered, you idiot. Jungkook gave the smallest smile as if he could somehow hear him. I know you are angry, you should be. His expression changed. I need you to know that I never stopped choosing you. Jimin touched the screen. Where are you? Jungkook looked toward something outside the frame. His face suddenly changed. Fear flashed across his eyes. They are coming. He leaned closer to the camera. Jimin, whatever you do, don't trust. The video cut to black. Jimin stared at the screen. Don't trust who? Mina stood silently behind him. Then the phone vibrated. A new message appeared. Unknown number, you found room 17. Jimin looked at Mina. Another message arrived. Unknown number, now come to the river. Alone, Mina read it over his shoulder. It's a trap. Jimin closed the phone. Probably. You can't go. Jimin looked at her. If Jungkook is there, I have to. Mina shook her head. That's exactly what they want. Jimin turned toward the photographs covering the walls. Every image showed how much of his life Jungkook had sacrificed to protect him. He could not simply walk away now. Then we'll make them think I'm going alone. Mina stared at him. What are you planning? Jimin looked at the old station clock. It still showed 11:43. Jungkook always planned 3 steps ahead. He picked up the black notebook. So will I. Outside, a train horn sounded in the distance. Jimin and Mina exchanged a look. The old station was supposed to be abandoned. Yet somewhere beneath the floor, something began to vibrate. A hidden mechanism had activated. One of the walls slowly shifted, revealing a narrow passage behind it. Jimin stared into the darkness. On the wall inside the passage was a single sentence written in Jungkook's handwriting. If you found this, Jimin, you are finally ready to remember. Jimin stared at Jungkook's handwriting on the hidden wall until the words seemed to move beneath the weak yellow light. If you found this, Jimin, you are finally ready to remember. His fingers brushed the cold concrete beside the sentence, searching for some trace of Jungkook in the dust, some impossible proof that Jungkook had stood in this exact place and believed Jimin would eventually arrive. Mina remained behind him, silent and tense, one hand resting near the inside pocket of her coat. Jimin, she said quietly, we should leave. Jimin did not move. No, this place is compromised. Jungkook built this for me. Exactly, which means whoever is looking for Jungkook may know about it too. Jimin turned toward her. Then why did Jungkook leave it here? Mina hesitated. Because he knew you would come. Jimin looked back into the passage. The darkness seemed to breathe. Somewhere deep inside, water dripped at regular intervals. Drip, drip, drip. He switched on his flashlight and stepped through. The passage was narrow enough that his shoulders almost touched both walls. Old cables hung from the ceiling, some wrapped in brittle insulation, others disappearing into cracks. The air smelled of rust and damp stone. Mina followed reluctantly. They walked for several minutes without speaking. Jimin counted every step unconsciously. 1, 2, 3. By 27, the corridor opened into a circular chamber. In the center stood a wooden table. On the table was a glass box. Inside the box lay a small silver pendant. Jimin stopped. He knew it immediately. Jungkook had worn that pendant for years. He had never explained where it came from. Jimin remembered touching it once and asking, what does this mean? Jungkook had answered, a promise. Jimin approached the glass. Why would he leave this here? Mina looked around the room. Maybe because he knew you would recognize it. Jimin found a small latch on the glass box. He opened it and lifted the pendant. It was cold against his palm. On the back, there was an engraving he had never seen before. Jimin 11:43, his breath caught. The clock, Mina nodded. The time from the night of the incident. Jimin closed his eyes. A headache suddenly exploded behind his forehead. He staggered. Images flashed through his mind. A dark garage, rain, a metal case, a woman screaming, Jungkook running toward him, someone holding a gun. Jimin gasped and grabbed the table. Jimin, Mina reached for him. Don't touch me. His voice shook. I remember. Mina froze. Jimin pressed his hands against his temples. The clock wasn't broken. What? The clock at the station. He looked toward her. It stopped at 11:43 because that was the time. The time of what? Jimin's breathing became ragged. The recording. Another memory surfaced. He was younger, standing beside a parked car. A small device lay on the ground. He picked it up. Someone shouted his name. Then Jungkook appeared, not the Jungkook Jimin knew. A frightened, desperate Jungkook. He grabbed Jimin's wrist and pulled him behind a concrete pillar. "Don't look," Jungkook had whispered, but Jimin had looked anyway. He saw a man in a gray coat pointing a weapon. He saw Mina standing nearby. He saw another man kneeling on the ground. And then he saw a fourth person. Someone whose face Jimin could not remember. Someone who had spoken directly to Jungkook. "You have until morning." Jimin opened his eyes. There was someone else. Mina's expression changed. "Who? I don't know. What did they say?" Jimin swallowed. "They told Jungkook he had until morning." Mina stared at him. "That doesn't make sense." "It does." Jimin looked down at the pendant. "Because the threat wasn't about me." Mina stepped closer. "Then what was it about?" "Jungkook." Silence settled between them. Jimin suddenly understood. "They didn't threaten to hurt me if Jungkook stayed." His voice became quieter. "They threatened to hurt Jungkook if he didn't cooperate." Mina's eyes widened. "That's why he disappeared." Jimin nodded slowly. "He wasn't protecting me from them." He looked toward the dark corridor. "He was protecting them from me." Before Mina could respond, a sound echoed through the chamber, a metallic click. Jimin turned. The entrance behind them had closed. "Mina!" She moved toward the door and tried the handle. It did not move. "We're locked in." Jimin looked at the table. A tiny red light had appeared beneath the glass box. Then a speaker crackled. Jungkook's voice filled the chamber. "Jimin, if you're hearing this, I need you to stay calm." Jimin's eyes filled immediately. "Jungkook, I know you're scared." A pause. "I'm scared too." Jimin stared at the speaker. "Where are you?" "Somewhere I shouldn't be." The recording continued. "But if you found the pendant, you remembered the first part." Mina looked at Jimin. "First part," Jungkook continued. "There are 3 memories. The first tells you what happened, the second tells you who betrayed me, the third tells you where I am." Jimin's heart hammered. "Then tell me." "I can't." "Why?" "Because the system is listening." Jimin looked around. "What system?" Jungkook's voice became quieter. "Everything around you." The lights flickered. Jimin stepped back. "Jungkook, stop talking in riddles." A faint laugh came through the speaker. It was the first time Jimin had heard Jungkook sound almost normal since the disappearance. "You always hated riddles." "I hate you leaving me more." Silence. Then Jungkook said, "I know." Jimin closed his eyes. "Come back." The recording paused. "I'm trying." Jimin pressed his fist against his mouth. Jungkook continued, "The second memory is hidden in the place where we first promised not to lie to each other." Jimin immediately knew. The riverside bench. 5 years ago, after their first major argument, Jimin and Jungkook had sat beside the river until sunrise. Jungkook had said, "Whatever happens, don't lie to me." Jimin had promised. Jungkook had promised too. Mina watched his expression change. "You know where it is." Jimin nodded. "The river." Suddenly the locked door opened. Jimin looked at Mina. "Why did it open?" "Because the message finished." They stepped back into the passage, but before leaving, Jimin looked at the speaker. "Jungkook." No response. "If you can hear me, listen carefully." He tightened the pendant around his fingers. "I'm coming for you." The speaker remained silent, yet Jimin thought he heard something beneath the static, a whisper. "I know." They hurried back toward the station entrance. The morning fog had lifted. The city beyond the station was brightening beneath a pale gray sky. Mina led Jimin toward a waiting car. "We'll go to the river." Jimin opened the passenger door but stopped. "No." Mina looked at him. "What?" "If they're watching, they'll expect us to go directly there." "Then what do you suggest?" Jimin looked at the black notebook. Jungkook always had a backup. He flipped through the pages. Several pages had been torn out. He noticed the pattern immediately. "The missing pages." Mina frowned. "What about them?" "They're not missing." Jimin turned the notebook upside down. A tiny compartment had been stitched into the back cover. He cut it open with the edge of the key. 3 folded pages fell out. Mina stared. Jungkook hid them. Jimin unfolded the first. It contained a map. The second contained several names. The third contained a single sentence. "If Jimin is with Mina, trust him. If Jimin is alone, run." Mina stared at the sentence. "He trusted you." Jimin shook his head. "No, he trusted us." He looked at the map. "This isn't the river." "Then where?" Jimin pointed to a small circle drawn beneath the riverbank. "An underground maintenance tunnel." Mina's expression hardened. "That's where they took him." Jimin looked at her. "You knew." "I suspected." "Why didn't you tell me?" Mina hesitated. "Because Jungkook asked me not to." Jimin's anger flared. "Everyone keeps saying Jungkook asked them not to tell me anything." Mina looked down. "He was trying to keep you alive." "And now," Jimin's voice cracked, Now I'm alive and he's gone. Mina had no answer. They drove toward the river through quiet morning streets. Jimin watched the city pass through the window. Cafes were opening. People were walking to work. Buses moved through intersections. Ordinary life continued while Jimin's entire world had become a puzzle built by Jungkook. When they reached the riverside, Jimin immediately recognized the bench. The wood was older now, the paint faded. He approached slowly. Beneath the bench was a small metal plate. He knelt and found a keyhole. The silver key from room 17 fit perfectly. The compartment opened. Inside was a small recorder and another letter. Jimin lifted the letter. His hands shook. Jimin, Jungkook had written, if you found this, then you have remembered the night we met. Jimin read on. I need you to know that I didn't fall in love with you because I was assigned to protect you. I fell in love with you because you were the first person who made me forget I was afraid. Jimin closed his eyes. A tear rolled down his cheek. You idiot, he whispered. Why didn't you tell me? He continued. There is one person I never told you about. Someone who knew everything from the beginning. Someone who helped arrange our first meeting. Jimin froze. The name was written at the bottom, Kang Minyu, Jungkook's brother. Jimin's stomach tightened. Mina read over his shoulder, Minyu. Jimin stood slowly. Jungkook said not to trust him. Then we shouldn't. Jimin looked at the river. But Jungkook also said there was someone who arranged our first meeting. Mina nodded. And that person was Minyu. A phone began ringing. Jimin reached into his pocket. It's not his phone. Mina stared at hers. She answered. No one spoke. Then a man's voice came through. Jimin. Mina's face turned pale. Jimin took the phone from her. Who is this? You already know. Jimin's blood ran cold. The voice sounded strangely familiar. Where is Jungkook? The man laughed quietly. You still think this is about finding him? It is. No, Jimin, this is about remembering why Jungkook was never supposed to love you. Jimin tightened his grip on the phone. Tell me where he is. Come to the old maintenance tunnel beneath the river. Jimin looked at Mina. Why? Because Jungkook is waiting. The call ended. Jimin stared at the blank screen. Mina immediately shook her head. It's a trap. I know. Then don't go. Jimin looked down at Jungkook's letter. I have spent too long letting Jungkook make decisions for me. He folded the letter carefully and placed it against his chest. This time I'm making the decision. Mina sighed. Then I'm coming with you. Jimin nodded. They walked toward the riverbank. Beneath them, hidden under layers of concrete and water, was an old maintenance tunnel. Jimin descended the narrow stairs first. The smell of damp earth filled his lungs. Water dripped from the ceiling. Their footsteps echoed through the darkness. After several minutes, they reached a metal door. It was already open. Jimin pushed it wider. A single light flickered inside. At the far end of the room stood a man, tall, dark coat, hands in his pockets. Jimin stopped. The man slowly turned around. Jimin had never seen him before, yet something about his face felt disturbingly familiar. The man smiled. You finally remembered me. Jimin stared at him. Who are you? The man took one step forward. I'm the reason Jungkook left you. Jimin's heart stopped. The man smiled again. And I'm Jungkook's brother. You finally remembered me. The man's voice echoed through the underground tunnel, calm enough to make Jimin's skin crawl. Jimin stood frozen beneath the flickering fluorescent light, Jungkook's scarf wrapped tightly around his neck, while Mina shifted beside him with one hand hidden beneath her coat. You're Minyu, Jimin said. The man smiled. Kang Minyu. Jimin studied his face, searching for something familiar in the sharp jaw, the dark eyes, the faint scar beneath his left eyebrow. Nothing. Yet the way Minyu looked at him made Jimin feel as though they had met many times before. Where is Jungkook? Jimin demanded. Minyu tilted his head, still thinking about Jungkook. I came here for Jungkook. Of course you did. Minyu took another step. You always do. Jimin's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means Jungkook was right about you. Mina moved between them. Don't come closer. Minyu laughed softly. Still protecting him, Mina. Someone has to. Minyu's smile disappeared. You have no idea what you started 5 years ago. Jimin felt a cold pressure building behind his eyes. Tell me. You want the truth. Yes. Minyu looked at him for several seconds. Then stop asking where Jungkook is and ask yourself why Jungkook was assigned to you in the first place. Jimin's jaw tightened. Because I witnessed something. That's what Jungkook told you. Isn't it true? Partly. Minyu reached into his coat and pulled out an old photograph. He held it toward Jimin. Look carefully. Jimin hesitated before taking it. The photograph showed the old parking garage 5 years earlier. Jimin stood near the entrance. Mina was visible beside a black vehicle. Jungkook stood in the distance, but there was someone else. A young man stood directly behind Jimin. Jimin stared at the face, his breath caught. That's impossible, Minyu smiled. You remember him. Jimin's mind flashed, a hand on his shoulder, a voice whispering his name, a silver ring. Then the memory vanished. Who is he? Jimin asked. Minyu's eyes darkened. You. Jimin stared at him. What? That photograph was taken before the accident. Minyu pointed at the figure. You were not standing beside that man, you were standing beside yourself. Jimin looked again. The image seemed distorted. The figure behind him had the same face, the same eyes, the same scar near the eyebrow. No. Mina stepped closer. Jimin, give me the photograph. He handed it over. Mina stared at it, her expression changing. This isn't a normal photograph. What do you mean? The background has been manipulated. Minyu nodded. Exactly. Pulled a small device from his pocket. It's an old composite image. He pressed a button. A faint red light projected onto the wall. The photograph appeared enlarged. The figure behind Jimin dissolved into layers. Beneath it was another image. A young man stood beside Jungkook. Minyu. Jimin looked from the wall to Minyu. You were there. Yes. Why? Because I was the one who sent Jungkook. Jimin's stomach tightened. You sent him to me. I did. Why? Minyu's expression became unreadable. Because you were supposed to disappear. Silence. Mina immediately stepped forward. Minyu. You heard me. Jimin stared at him. I was supposed to disappear. Yes. Who ordered it? Seojin. Jimin's blood ran cold. Then why am I still alive? Minyu looked at him. Because Jungkook disobeyed. The words settled into the room like smoke. Jimin closed his eyes. He was supposed to let them kill me. He was supposed to make it look accidental. And instead, he saved you. Jimin opened his eyes. Why? Minyu smiled sadly. That is the question I've been asking for 5 years. He turned away. At first, Jungkook said he saved you because you were innocent. And later he said he saved you because he couldn't imagine watching you die. Jimin's throat tightened. Where is he? You still don't understand. Minyu turned back. Jungkook didn't disappear to escape you. Jungkook disappeared to keep Seojin from finding you. Then take me to him. Minyu shook his head. I can't. Why? Because Jungkook isn't being held by Seojin anymore. Jimin froze. Then who has him? Minyu's expression changed. Jungkook has himself. Jimin stared at him. What does that mean? It means he chose to disappear. Jimin's anger erupted. You expect me to believe that? I expect you to understand why. Minyu walked toward the wall. He pressed his palm against a hidden panel. A section of concrete slid aside. Behind it was a room filled with monitors. Jimin entered slowly. On one monitor was a live image of a small cabin surrounded by snow-covered trees. His heart stopped. Jungkook, he was sitting inside the cabin, alive, alone. His hair was longer, his face thinner. He was writing something at a table. Jimin stepped toward the screen. Jungkook, his voice broke. Jungkook suddenly looked up. He turned toward a window as though he could somehow feel someone watching him. Jimin reached toward the screen. He's alive. Mina nodded. Yes. Jimin looked at Minyu. Where is that? Northern Mountains. Take me there. No, why? Because Jungkook asked me not to. Jimin slammed his palm onto the table. Everyone keeps saying what Jungkook wants. What about what I want? Minyu looked at him. You want him back. Yes. Even if bringing him back puts you in danger. Yes. Even if Jungkook loses the only chance he has to end this. Jimin hesitated. What does that mean? Minyu pointed at another screen. Showed documents, photographs, financial records, and names. Seojin has been building a network for years. Jungkook has been gathering evidence. Jimin looked at the files. Then why leave me? Because you are the final piece. Jimin's eyes narrowed. What piece? Minyu opened a file. It contained an old medical report. Jimin recognized his own name. No, he picked it up. This isn't mine. It is. I never had this examination. You don't remember it. Jimin read the date, 5 years ago. The night after the parking garage incident. What happened to me? Minyu's expression softened. You suffered a head injury. Jimin stared at the report. That's why I forgot. Yes. And Jungkook knew. He was there. Jimin's breathing became uneven. Another memory surfaced. A hospital room, white curtains, the smell of antiseptic. Jungkook sitting beside his bed. Jungkook holding his hand. Jimin remembered opening his eyes. He remembered asking, Who are you? Jungkook had smiled sadly. Someone who owes you an apology. The memory disappeared again. Jimin gripped the table. He was there. Minyu nodded. Every night. Then why did he pretend we met later? Because you were afraid of him. Why? Because the doctors warned him that forcing your memories back could cause severe psychological distress. Jimin stared at the monitor. So he let me forget him. Yes. Jimin's eyes filled with tears. And then he made me fall in love with him again. Minyu looked away. He never planned that. Jimin laughed through his tears. Of course he didn't. Mina stepped closer. Jimin, he wiped his face. I need to see him. Minyu remained silent. Please, Jimin said, just let me talk to him. Minyu looked at the monitor. Jungkook was still writing inside the cabin. He won't answer. Let me try, Minyu hesitated. Then he activated a communication line. The screen flickered. Jungkook's cabin appeared larger. A microphone symbol appeared. Jungkook, Minyu said. Response. Jungkook, it's me. Jungkook stopped writing, his head lifted slowly. Minyu. His voice came through the speaker. Jimin's breath caught. Hearing Jungkook again felt like being struck in the chest. Minyu glanced at Jimin. Someone wants to talk to you. Silence. Jungkook's expression changed. No, Jimin stepped toward the microphone. Jungkook. Jungkook froze, his eyes widened. Jimin. Jimin covered his mouth. Tears streamed down his face. Yes. Jungkook stood so quickly that his chair fell backward. Why is he there? Minyu answered. He found the station. I told you to keep him away. Jimin moved closer. You don't get to tell me where I can go anymore. Jungkook stared at the camera. Jimin, listen to me. No, Jimin shook his head. You listen to me. Jungkook remained silent. You left without saying goodbye. Jimin's voice trembled. You left a letter telling me not to look for you. You knew I would anyway. Jungkook lowered his eyes. I knew. Then why? Because I was afraid. Jimin stopped. He had never heard Jungkook admit that before. Of what? Jungkook looked directly into the camera. Losing you. Jimin cried harder. You almost lost me by leaving. Jungkook closed his eyes. I know. You should have trusted me. I know. You should have told me the truth. I know. Jimin laughed bitterly. You always say you know after you've already broken everything. Jungkook's face tightened. I thought if you hated me, you would survive. I don't hate you. Jungkook looked at him. That's what scares me. Jimin stepped closer. Come home. Jungkook shook his head. I can't. Why? Because if I come back, they will follow me to you. Then we'll face them together. You don't understand. Then explain. Jungkook looked away. I have one last thing to do. Jimin whispered. What? Jungkook did not answer. Jungkook. He looked back at the camera. I need to finish what started 5 years ago. And after that, Jungkook's eyes softened. After that, I want to come home. Jimin's heart broke at the simplicity of the sentence. Then come home now. I can't. Why? Jungkook swallowed. Because someone inside this room is listening. Jimin looked at Minyu. Minyu immediately checked the monitors. What? Jimin asked. Jungkook leaned toward the camera. Jimin, the person you should fear isn't Seojin. The transmission crackled. It's the person who has been helping you since the beginning. Jimin looked at Mina. Mina went pale. Jungkook continued. Not trust. The screen went black. Jimin stared at it. Jungkook, no response. He turned toward Mina. She was motionless. You knew, Jimin whispered. Mina shook her head. I don't know what he meant. Minyu stared at her. Where were you before you met Jimin? Mina did not answer. Jimin stepped backward. Mina, she looked at him. Tears had appeared in her eyes. I was there that night. I know, no, her voice broke. You don't know. She reached inside her coat. Minyu immediately drew his weapon. Don't. Mina pulled out a small silver device. Jimin recognized it instantly. The recording device from 5 years ago. I took it, Mina whispered. I was the one who took the evidence. Jimin stared at her. Why? Mina looked toward the dead monitor where Jungkook had disappeared. Because I was the one who betrayed Jungkook. The room became completely silent. Jimin could hear his own heartbeat. Mina lowered the device. And now, Jimin, I need you to know why. I betrayed Jungkook, Mina said again. And this time there was no hesitation in her voice. Only the exhausted certainty of someone who had carried the same confession like a stone inside her chest for years. Jimin stared at the silver recording device in her hand. It looked impossibly small for something that had apparently destroyed so many lives. Minyu stood several feet away, his expression unreadable, while the dead monitor reflected the three of them as distorted silhouettes. Tell me everything, Jimin said. Mina looked at him. If I tell you, you may never forgive me. I didn't ask whether I would forgive you. Jimin's voice was quiet. I asked you to tell me. Mina lowered her eyes. 5 years ago, I was working for Seojin. The confession seemed to make the air colder. I wasn't part of his inner circle. I was an information runner. I delivered messages, watched people, followed targets, and erased evidence when I was ordered to. Jimin's fingers tightened around Jungkook's scarf. Was I one of your targets? Yes. Mina swallowed. You were supposed to be monitored for 3 months. And Jungkook? Jungkook was assigned to monitor me. Jimin stared at her. So Jungkook wasn't sent to protect me? Not originally. Mina looked toward the monitor. He was sent because Seojin believed Jungkook was loyal. Minyu gave a bitter laugh. Seojin never trusted anyone. Exactly, Mina replied. He tested everyone. Jimin stepped closer. Then why did Jungkook turn against him? Mina's eyes softened. Because of you. Jimin looked away. Everyone keeps saying that. Because it's true. Mina placed the recording device on the table. The first time Jungkook saw you, you were standing outside the garage. You were arguing with someone on the phone. You looked angry, but you were trying not to cry. Jimin frowned. A faint memory returned. Rain falling from a black sky. His phone pressed against his ear. His own voice saying, I don't care what you think. Mina continued. Jungkook watched you for 20 minutes. He was supposed to report your routine. Instead, he wrote something different. She opened a small notebook and showed Jimin a page. The handwriting was Jungkook's. He looks lonely. Jimin's throat tightened. He wrote that? Yes. Why? Because Jungkook had always been terrible at pretending he didn't care. Minyu looked away. Mina continued. The next day, Seojin asked Jungkook whether you were dangerous. Jimin looked up. What did he say? He said no. Was that a lie? No, Mina smiled faintly. That was the first truth Jungkook told him. Jimin looked at the silver device. And the recording. Mina touched it carefully. This contains the conversation Seojin never wanted anyone to hear. She pressed a button. Static filled the room. Then a man's voice emerged. If the witness remembers, we all lose. Another voice answered. The witness won't remember. Jimin's skin prickled. He recognized the first voice, Han Seojin. The second voice was unfamiliar. Then Jungkook's voice entered. What happens to him after the procedure? Seojin replied. He forgets. Jimin's eyes widened. Procedure. Mina stopped the recording. That's enough for now. No. Jimin reached for the device. Play it. Jimin, play it. Mina hesitated, then continued. Seojin's voice returned. The memory suppression will work if the injury is severe enough, but if he remembers, eliminate him. Jungkook's voice sounded furious. You said he would be protected. I said he would be forgotten. Silence. Then Jungkook said, if you touch him again, I will destroy everything you built. Seojin laughed. You already failed, Jungkook. The recording ended. Jimin stood completely still. They did this to me. Mina nodded. You were injured that night. On purpose. Yes. Jimin's stomach twisted. And Jungkook let me forget. Jungkook didn't have a choice. He always had a choice. Not then. Mina's voice cracked. He was 17 seconds away from watching you die. Jimin looked at her. What? Mina closed her eyes. The gunman fired. Jungkook pushed you away. The bullet struck him. Jimin's eyes widened. Jungkook was shot. Yes, but he never told me. Because the doctors told him that your recovery depended on keeping the event buried. Jimin remembered Jungkook's scars, one near his shoulder, another beneath his ribs. He had always assumed they came from accidents. They hadn't. Jimin touched his own chest. Why didn't I remember him? Because after the injury, you couldn't recognize him. Jimin's eyes filled. And Jungkook, he sat beside you every night. Mina's voice became softer. You kept asking who he was. Jimin looked down. What did he say? He told you his name. Jimin smiled sadly. That sounds like Jungkook. Then one night you asked him why he kept coming back. Mina paused. He said, because you once saved me too. Jimin frowned. I saved him. You don't remember. Another memory surfaced. Jimin saw himself as a child, standing beside a younger boy near a playground. The boy had a scraped knee. Jimin offered him a handkerchief. Are you okay? He had asked. The boy smiled. I'm Jungkook. Jimin gasped. We knew each other before. Mina nodded. You met when you were children. Minyu suddenly looked at Mina. That's not the whole truth. Mina turned toward him. Don't. He deserves to know. Not from you. Jimin looked between them. What aren't you telling me? Minyu stepped forward. Jungkook's father and Seojin were partners. Jimin stared. What? Years before Jungkook met you, his family was involved in Seojin's organization. Mina shook her head. Minyu. Jimin needs to understand. Minyu continued. Jungkook was never just a protector. He was raised inside the system he later tried to destroy. Jimin felt his stomach drop. So Jungkook knew them all his life. Yes, and you? I tried to get out, but Jungkook stayed, because he believed he could change it. Jimin looked at the dead monitor. He was fighting them from inside. Minyu nodded. For years. Jimin's voice became barely audible, and he never told me. He thought you would leave if you knew. Jimin closed his eyes. He was wrong. Mina looked at him. He was afraid. So am I. Jimin opened his eyes, but I stayed. Suddenly the lights went out. The room plunged into darkness. Mina whispered, don't move. A sharp metallic sound came from the corridor. Minyu pulled out his weapon. They're here. Jimin's heart raced. Who? Seojin's people. Mina grabbed Jimin's arm. We have to go. A gunshot exploded outside. Jimin flinched. Another shot shattered a light fixture. Glass rained onto the floor. Minyu pushed them behind the table. Stay down. Footsteps approached rapidly. Jimin heard voices. Search every room. He's not here. Find the recording. Jimin looked at Mina. She understood immediately. The device. Mina pulled it from the table and slipped it into Jimin's hand. Keep this. What about you? They'll search me first. Mina, go. She pushed Jimin toward a narrow side passage. Minyu followed. This way. They ran through the tunnel while gunfire echoed behind them. Jimin's shoes slipped on wet concrete. He nearly fell, but Minyu caught his arm. Keep moving. Where are we going? The river exit. They reached a metal ladder. Minyu climbed first. Jimin followed. When he emerged, cold rain struck his face. The river stretched before them, black beneath the night sky. Mina appeared behind them seconds later. She was bleeding from her shoulder. Mina! Jimin ran toward her. I'm fine. You're bleeding. It's nothing. You're lying, she smiled weakly. Jungkook would say the same thing. Jimin almost laughed. Then he realized how much he missed him. Minyu looked toward the tunnel entrance. We don't have time. Where do we go? Jimin asked. Somewhere Seojin won't look, Mina answered. The cabin. Jimin froze. Jungkook's cabin, Minyu nodded. Yes. They drove through the night. The city disappeared behind them. Roads became narrower. Buildings became fewer. Mountains appeared in the distance beneath a sky crowded with dark clouds. Jimin sat in the back seat, staring at Jungkook's scarf. He kept thinking about the monitor. Jungkook sitting alone. Jungkook writing. Jungkook waiting. Every kilometer seemed to pull him closer to the person he had spent days searching for. But as the car climbed the mountain road, Jimin noticed something strange. Mina had stopped talking. Minyu kept checking the rearview mirror. Are we being followed? Jimin asked. Minyu didn't answer. Minyu. Yes. Jimin's stomach tightened. How many cars? 2. Mina looked at him. They're closing in. Minyu accelerated. Rain began falling heavily. The tires slipped on the wet road. Jimin grabbed the seat. How far? 20 minutes. Too long. Mina looked at the map. There is an old forest road. Minyu shook his head. It's dangerous. So is the road we're on. Minyu turned sharply. The car entered the forest. Branches scraped against the windows. Jimin looked behind them. Headlights appeared between the trees. They're still following us. Minyu pressed the accelerator. Suddenly the road disappeared beneath a landslide. He slammed on the brakes. The car stopped inches from the edge. Jimin's heart pounded. Behind them, headlights approached. We can't go forward, Minyu said. Mina opened the door. Then we walk. Jimin stepped out into the rain. How far? 3 kilometers. They grabbed their bags and ran into the forest. The rain soaked Jimin within seconds. Mud clung to his shoes. Branches scratched his face, but he kept moving. Jungkook was waiting. Somewhere beyond these trees, Jungkook was waiting. After nearly 20 minutes, they reached a clearing. The cabin stood at the center. A single warm light glowed through the window. Jimin stopped. His heart seemed to forget how to beat. Jungkook! He walked forward slowly. Mina touched his arm. Wait! Jimin looked at her. Why? Something is wrong. The cabin door was open. Jimin frowned. It wasn't open on the monitor. Minyu drew his weapon. Stay behind me. They approached cautiously. The cabin smelled of smoke and cedar. A chair was overturned. Papers were scattered across the floor. A cup of tea sat untouched on the table. It was still warm. Jimin's heart sank. He was here. Minyu checked the room. Recently. Jimin saw the notebook on the table. He picked it up. It was open to the final page. Jungkook had written only one sentence. I knew you would come. Beneath it was another line. I'm sorry you had to find me this way. Jimin's eyes filled with tears. Then he heard something. A faint sound from upstairs. 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Jimin looked toward the staircase. Jungkook, no answer. He climbed the stairs slowly. The hallway was dark. At the end was a closed bedroom door. Jimin reached for the handle. His hand trembled. He opened it. The room was empty, except for a mirror. Written across the mirror in black ink were 4 words. Look behind you, Jimin. Jimin's blood turned cold. He slowly turned. A figure stood in the doorway. A hand covered his mouth. A familiar voice whispered against his ear. Don't scream. Jimin froze. He knew that voice. Jungkook. Don't scream. Jungkook's voice trembled against Jimin's ear, and for one suspended second, the entire world seemed to stop moving. Jimin did not breathe. He did not blink. He simply stood there, feeling the warmth of Jungkook's hand over his mouth and the familiar pressure of Jungkook's body behind him. The same presence he had searched for through sleepless nights, rain-soaked streets, abandoned rooms, and memories that had refused to remain buried. Then Jungkook whispered, Jimin, please. Jimin pulled his hand away and turned. Jungkook stood only inches from him. He looked thinner. His hair had grown longer, falling messily over his forehead. There was a faint scar along his jaw and another disappearing beneath the collar of his dark shirt. His eyes, however, were exactly the same. Jimin stared at him as tears immediately filled his eyes. "You're alive!" Jungkook's expression broke. "Yes!" Jimin slapped his shoulder. Once, then again. "You idiot!" Jungkook did not defend himself. Jimin hit him again, weaker this time, before grabbing the front of his shirt and pulling him into a desperate embrace. Jungkook froze for half a second before wrapping both arms around him. Jimin buried his face against Jungkook's shoulder. The familiar scent of cedarwood and rain surrounded him. "I hate you," Jimin whispered through his tears. Jungkook closed his eyes. "I know. I hate you so much. I know. You left me." Jungkook's arms tightened around him. "I'm sorry." Jimin pulled away. "Don't say you're sorry." Jungkook looked at him. "Then what should I say? Tell me the truth." Jungkook's face became serious. "You don't want the truth." "Yes, I do. Jimin, I spent days believing you were dead." Jungkook's expression tightened. "I know. I read your letter. I know. I found the photographs." Jungkook looked away. "I know. I found room 17. His eyes returned to Jimin. "I know. I found your brother." Jungkook's jaw tightened. "I know. I found Mina." Jungkook went still. Jimin noticed immediately. "And I found out she betrayed you." Jungkook looked toward the hallway. "Where is she?" "Downstairs." "And Minyu?" "With her." Jungkook's expression changed. "You shouldn't have brought them here. You said not to trust them." Jungkook shook his head. "I said not to trust anyone." Jimin stared at him. "Do you trust me?" Jungkook looked directly into his eyes. "More than anyone." Jimin's anger softened for a moment. "Then tell me everything." Jungkook remained silent. Jimin waited. Finally, Jungkook walked toward the window and looked into the forest. "The reason I left wasn't only because Seojin found out about the evidence." Jimin followed him. "Then what was it?" "Because the evidence isn't the recording." Jimin frowned. "What is it?" Jungkook turned toward him. "You." Jimin's face went pale. "Me. The evidence was never stored in the device." Jungkook touched the side of Jimin's head gently. "It was encoded into your memory." Jimin stepped back. "How?" "During the accident, you saw everything, names, faces, locations, transactions. You remembered things no one else knew. And then I forgot. Your mind protected you." Jimin swallowed. "So Seojin wanted me dead because I remembered." "Yes, and you stayed with me because you were trying to protect the memory." Jungkook nodded. "And because I loved you." Jimin's eyes filled again. "When did you know?" "The first time you smiled at me." Jimin laughed through his tears. "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have." Jimin looked down. "Why didn't you tell me when I started remembering?" Jungkook's expression became painful. "Because I was afraid the memories would destroy you." "They already hurt." "I know." Jungkook stepped closer. "But now you're strong enough." Jimin stared at him. "Strong enough for what?" Jungkook reached into his pocket and removed a small photograph. He handed it to Jimin. It showed the parking garage 5 years ago. Jimin looked closely. "What am I supposed to see?" "Look at the reflection." Jimin examined the car window. His own reflection appeared. Behind it stood Jungkook, but there was another reflection beside him. A woman. Jimin recognized her. "Mina." Jungkook nodded. "She wasn't working for Seojin that night." Jimin looked at him. "Then why did she say she was?" "Because she was trying to protect someone." "Who?" Jungkook hesitated. "Her daughter." Jimin froze. "Mina has a daughter?" "Yes." "Where is she?" "Dead." Silence filled the room. Jungkook continued quietly. "Seojin killed her after Mina tried to leave." Jimin closed his eyes. Suddenly Mina's behavior made sense, her fear, her silence, her desperation. "So she betrayed you because Seojin threatened her?" "Yes, but why did she take the device?" "Because the device contained proof of her daughter's murder." Jimin stared at the photograph. "Then why didn't she tell me?" "Because she thought you would hate her." Jimin whispered. "Everyone keeps deciding what I can handle." Jungkook looked down. "I know." Jimin stepped toward him. "I don't need you to protect me from the truth." Jungkook nodded slowly. "I understand now." "Do you?" "Yes." "Then promise me something." "What?" "Never disappear again." Jungkook's eyes softened. "I promise." Jimin reached for his hand, their fingers intertwined. For a moment the years of fear seemed to dissolve. Then the cabin lights suddenly flickered. Jungkook's expression changed. "We have to leave." "Why?" "Because they found us." A distant engine roared through the forest. Jimin looked toward the window. Headlights appeared between the trees. Several vehicles were approaching the cabin. Mina and Minyu rushed upstairs. "They're here," Minyu said. Jungkook grabbed Jimin's hand. "Back entrance." They ran down the stairs. Gunfire cracked outside. Glass shattered. Mina pushed Jimin toward the rear door. "Go!" Minyu fired toward the windows. Jungkook pulled Jimin into the forest. Rain began again, heavy and cold. They ran between the trees. Behind them, voices shouted, "Find Jungkook! Don't let Jimin escape!" Jimin stumbled. Jungkook caught him. "Keep moving." "I'm trying. Look at me." Jimin looked up. "You're safe. Not without you." Jungkook tightened his grip. "I'm not leaving you again." They reached a narrow ravine. Jungkook stopped. "Down there." "Where?" "A tunnel." They climbed down carefully. The tunnel was barely wide enough for two people. Water rushed through it. Jimin slipped and Jungkook caught him again. "Careful. You always say that." Jungkook smiled faintly. "Because you never listen." For the first time in days, Jimin laughed. It was small, exhausted, but real. Jungkook looked at him as though the sound meant everything. They reached the other side and entered an abandoned railway maintenance room. Mina and Minyu joined them several minutes later. Everyone was soaked. Minyu shut the metal door. "We have maybe an hour." Jimin looked at Jungkook. "Then what?" Jungkook opened a metal cabinet and pulled out a file. "We end this." Inside were documents, photographs, bank records, and recordings. Jimin stared at the mountain of evidence. "This is everything." "Almost." Jungkook removed one final envelope. "This is the part Seojin is most afraid of." Jimin opened it. Inside was a photograph of Seojin standing beside someone Jimin never expected to see. Jimin's face went pale. "No." Jungkook watched him carefully. "You know him." Jimin shook his head. "I don't." "Look again." Jimin stared at the photograph. The man beside Seojin was older, but the face was unmistakable. Jimin knew him. Everyone did. He had been the person who publicly investigated Seojin years ago, the person who claimed to be helping victims, the person who had appeared on television dozens of times promising justice. Jimin whispered his name. "Director Han." Jungkook nodded. "He's been working with Seojin from the beginning." Jimin's stomach turned. "Then the investigation was fake." "Most of it," Mina added quietly. "The evidence was buried before it ever reached court." Jimin looked at Jungkook. "How do we expose them?" Jungkook smiled faintly. "We don't." "What?" "You do." Jimin frowned. Jungkook placed a small memory card in his palm. "Everything is on this." "Why give it to me?" "Because they still believe you're afraid." Jimin looked down at the card. "And I'm not." Jungkook shook his head. "You're terrified." Jimin looked at him. "Yes." Jungkook smiled. "That's what makes you brave." Jimin's eyes filled with tears. He closed his fingers around the card. "What happens after this?" Jungkook looked at him for a long moment. "We disappear." Jimin frowned. "Together." "If you want." Jimin stepped closer. "I want." Jungkook touched his cheek. "Then I'm done running." A loud explosion shook the building. Dust fell from the ceiling. Minyu shouted, "They're here." Jungkook grabbed Jimin's hand. "Stay with me." They ran through the maintenance corridor as the building began to shake. Behind them, doors burst open. Footsteps echoed. Jimin could hear people shouting their names. They reached an underground platform. A train waited in the darkness. Lights glowed through the mist. Jungkook stared at it. "This wasn't supposed to be here." Minyu looked confused. "Who sent it?" The train doors opened. A woman stepped out. Jimin stopped. He recognized her face from the photographs. Jungkook's expression became one of pure shock. "That's impossible." The woman looked directly at Jimin. "Jungkook," she said quietly, "you shouldn't have brought him here." Jimin stared at her. "Who are you?" The woman smiled sadly. "I'm the person who wrote the first letter." Jungkook grabbed Jimin's hand. "Don't listen to her." The woman's smile disappeared. "Because if Jimin hears the truth about what happened 5 years ago, he'll realize that you weren't the one who saved him." Jimin looked at Jungkook. The woman took one step forward. "Jimin saved Jungkook." Jimin stared at the woman standing beneath the dim railway lights, unable to understand the words she had just spoken. "I saved Jungkook," he repeated. Jungkook's grip tightened around his hand. "Jimin, don't listen to her." But Jimin looked at Jungkook and saw something that frightened him more than the woman's accusation. Jungkook was crying. Not openly, not dramatically, but one tear had slipped down his cheek before he could hide it. "You knew," Jimin whispered. Jungkook lowered his eyes. "Yes." The woman stepped closer. 5 years ago, Jungkook was the one being hunted. You were the one who found him bleeding behind that parking garage. You called for help. You stayed beside him until the ambulance arrived. You didn't know his name. You didn't know what he had done or who was chasing him. You simply refused to leave. Jimin's memory suddenly opened like a door. Rain, sirens, Jungkook lying on the pavement, his hand reaching toward Jimin. Jimin kneeling beside him, whispering, "Stay awake." Jungkook looking at him with terrified eyes. "Don't let them find me." Jimin remembered now, everything. The first meeting had never been an accident, but it had never been Jungkook's plan either. They had found each other when both of them were afraid. Jimin turned toward Jungkook. You didn't come into my life to protect me. Jungkook shook his head. No, you came into my life because I was already protecting you. Jungkook nodded. And somewhere along the way, I forgot how to live without you. Jimin stepped closer and touched Jungkook's cheek. You should have told me. I was afraid. You always were. Jungkook gave a broken smile. I know. Jimin wiped the tear from his face. But you're not alone anymore. The woman watched them quietly before handing Jimin a small envelope. This was supposed to reach you after everything ended. Jimin opened it. Inside was the final page of Jungkook's original letter. He read it slowly. Jimin, if I ever disappear, don't spend your life waiting at the door for me. Live, laugh, eat the food you pretend you don't like. Keep watering the little plant even when you forget. And if someday I come back, don't ask why I left first. Ask me why I came home. Jimin's vision blurred. He looked at Jungkook. You came home. Jungkook smiled through tears. Yes. Outside, sirens began approaching. Minyu looked toward the tunnel. The evidence has been released. Mina checked the device. The files are already spreading. Jungkook exhaled slowly. For years, Seojin had controlled people through fear, silence, and secrets. Now the truth was moving faster than he could erase it. Jimin took Jungkook's hand. It's over. Jungkook looked at him. Not everything. Jimin smiled faintly. Then we'll finish the rest together. Months later, the old station was demolished. The underground rooms were sealed. The hidden files were turned over to investigators, and the names that had remained buried for years finally became public. Mina testified about Seojin's organization. Minyu disappeared from the public eye after giving his evidence, choosing a quiet life far from the people who had once controlled his family. Jungkook spent weeks recovering, learning what it felt like to sleep without expecting someone to break down the door. Jimin stayed beside him. Sometimes they spoke about the past, sometimes they didn't. Healing did not arrive like a miracle. It came slowly in ordinary moments. Morning coffee, open windows, grocery lists, arguments about whose turn it was to wash the dishes. One evening, months after Jungkook returned, Jimin found him sitting beside the old wooden clock. You fixed it again, Jimin said. Jungkook smiled. It was never broken. Jimin sat beside him. The clock ticked steadily. 11:43. Jimin looked at the time and smiled. You know, I used to hate that number. Jungkook took his hand. What about now? Now it reminds me that we survived. Jungkook leaned his forehead against Jimin's. I'm sorry I left without saying goodbye. Jimin closed his eyes. And I'm sorry I made you think you had to leave. You didn't. Then why did you? Jungkook smiled sadly. Because I didn't know how to love someone without protecting them. Jimin squeezed his hand. And now, Jungkook looked at him. Now I know love isn't deciding for someone, it's staying and letting them choose. Jimin smiled. Good answer. Was there a test? Always, Jungkook laughed. It was the same laugh Jimin remembered from years ago, only now it sounded lighter. The clock continued ticking. Outside, rain began falling softly against the windows. Jimin looked at Jungkook and realized that the goodbye he had feared for so long had already happened. Jungkook had left once without saying goodbye. He had left a letter because he believed disappearing was the only way to keep Jimin safe. But he had been wrong. Love had never been about disappearing. It had been about returning. And this time, when Jungkook reached for Jimin's hand, he did not let go. Jimin leaned against Jungkook's shoulder, listening to his heartbeat. Stay, Jimin whispered. Jungkook kissed the top of his head. I'm here. The clock struck midnight. Jimin smiled. For the first time in years, midnight did not sound like an ending. It sounded like a beginning. And beneath the quiet ticking of the old clock, Jungkook and Jimin finally understood the truth neither of them had been brave enough to say before. Some people leave because they are afraid, but the ones who truly belong to you will always find their way home.